how do you screen people who you think aren't ready to undergo the transformation?
I would never try to convince anybody that they should do psychedelics.
Really?
Dr. Tracy Kim Townsend is a licensed medical doctor, orthopedic surgeon, psilocybin facilitator, and ceremonialist.
She practices integrative medicine through a holistic approach.
There must be a lot of trauma associated with working in the ER.
We don't have the proper grief rituals in place to process a lot of this trauma.
It seems like a profession that I would not wish my child to go into.
Really, it's like entering a cult. It's a deconditioning process of letting go, of giving up everything for your job.
How do you stop a bad trip when a client has one?
Desiree Podcast.
The content in this video is for entertainment purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional for any medical concerns or before making any changes to your health regimen.
Tracy Kim Townsend. Dr. Tracy Kim Townsend. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Fantastically. So, tell me about the most meaningful experience you've ever seen a client undergo in your psychedelic therapy sessions.
Ooh, that's a good one to open with. The most meaningful. You know, it's hard to pick just one. I think there's a few that come to mind. There's a little bit of recency bias for me, so I'm thinking of more recent clients. But I would say it's amazing how universal a lot of these experiences are from client to client. And I would say the most meaningful that are ones where clients are processing grief for loss of loved ones, whether it's a parent or a child or a lover, being able to process that and to integrate that pain is really, really meaningful for me to help aid in that process. And then just another one that comes to mind right off the bat is also a client of mine who had been diagnosed as a teenager with anxiety and depression. And she was put on medications, pharmaceutical medications for that, antidepressants, and finds herself in midlife, had tapered off of those medicines. We worked together. I supported her in that process. And then she had her session with me, and it was a challenging session, but the thing that she came away with, which wasn't immediately, it actually came through in the integration process in the days afterwards, actually, was that she was not broken. That was the message that came through, that she didn't even realize she was carrying that belief her entire life, that her brain was somehow broken. She had internalized that as a teenager. And to wake up to the fact that she is not broken, she is whole and always has been, and to be reborn in that way was really, really meaningful.
Wow. How do you prepare people for these sessions?
That's also a great question, and something that is evolving, I would say, in my practice. You know, I take a sort of four-pronged or four pillars approach to just help bring a really practical approach and to help people with conceptualizing how to prepare themselves. And so the four pillars are broken up into physical health, mental health, emotional health, and spiritual, whatever that means for someone. Spiritual meaning our relationship to awe, mystery, wonder, that which can't really be known by our intellectual cognitive minds. And so I try to have people do a reflection or move into a contemplative practice within each of those spheres. And I have a pretty thorough intake form that's like a 360-degree, evaluation of one's health in each of those realms. And I really encourage people, if they don't already have a meditation practice or some sort of contemplative practice, whether that's journaling, a gratitude practice. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It just has to be sustainable. And so I say consistency is what's key here. But I find meditation and journaling to both be pretty potent practices for supporting people through the preparation phase, which is a lot of it is about intention setting, and then weaving that into the integration phase on the other side of it. And I think it's no coincidence that each of those practices played a profound role for me before I entered onto the psychedelic medicine path. And so I'm a big proponent of those two practices, in addition to, movement and just general mindfulness, tuning in with nature in some capacity. We are working with a medicine with psilocybin mushrooms that comes straight from the earth. And so that plays a big role in the preparation and integration that I help my clients walk through with this medicine.
You spoke about your journey, and I'm really curious about that because you had a pretty illustrious career up until now. I mean, you continue to have one, obviously, but like one thing that I found in your biography was that you did a fellowship at the Boston Children's Hospital at Harvard. Like, I don't know if you can get much higher than that on the totem pole. And so at some point you decided to move to Oregon and start practicing psychedelic medicine along with your psychedelic facilitation along with your medical career. And I'm just wondering how all of that happened. Like, I would love to hear the story of your career from the beginning, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. I wanted to be a doctor from the time that I was really young. I pinpoint it back to when I was 8 years old. I came down with pneumonia in the wintertime. It was in the weeks leading up to Christmas. And that was the first time I was hospitalized, and I was quite sick. And I was in a children's hospital. And for me, though, even though I was quite sick, I have a very positive recollection of the experience. But if you talk to my mom, she says it aged her 20 years. It was terrible. My kidneys started failing at one point. And if you look back at photos of me, there was like a Santa Claus who came by to volunteer for us kids in the hospital at Christmas time. And there's a photo of me and I look very ill, dark circles under my eyes. I look somewhat jaundiced. But that kind of set me on a track to, I was just fascinated by medicine. I wanted to help in the world and I loved science. And so, and it was very, well supported. I joke with my Korean mother, oh, you want to be a doctor? Okay, wonderful. We'll do everything possible to nurture that interest. And so, just worked hard. I scratched and clawed my way into medical school. I had some trouble in undergrad after my dad passed away, but managed to get my act together and get into medical school, got into medical school. And then I say that's when I kind of woke up to the hellscape that is the modern industrial American healthcare system. There's an incredible good miracles, really modern day miracles that are being performed in the system. But I was just waking up to all of the ways that we don't serve patients and that we are desperate for really new tools for helping people. I was fascinated always with surgery. I think more than anything for the ritual of it, and enter into the operating room, and whether it was the ritual of scrubbing my hands in the sink and donning the gown and gloves, or morbidity and mortality conference. I loved the somewhat more instant gratification of surgical intervention. And I feel like it was the area where Western allopathic medicine really shines, is in surgical interventions for certain conditions or injuries or and things of that nature. I explored various surgical subspecialties, was inspired to pursue orthopedic surgery because there still is a dearth of women represented in the specialty. I say I answered the feminist call to go after that incredibly physically demanding and grueling surgical subspecialty. My younger brother, I have a brother who's a year younger than me, and he was pursuing Navy SEAL training. So I say it's the closest thing I could do to Navy SEAL training as a woman. And we're gluttons for punishment in my family. We're somewhat masochistic in that way. I have competitive nature to me. I always played sports as a kid. And there are many reasons why I was drawn to orthopedic surgery. It also is just fun. It's fun working with your hands. I say they have the most fun equipment and tools, and we really help people. You know, if you break your femur in a car accident, something like that, I always say we can put a nail in it and you're walking the same day. It's really a miracle. And in fact,
the same day? Really?
The same day. Yeah. You can be full weight bearing depending on the pattern of the femur fracture. But if it's a stable pattern, you can put a nail in it, and it actually aids in the compressive forces of walking on it.
That's a miracle.
It's a miracle. It's a miracle, and it's fun to do. I always liked working with my hands as a kid. Loved, I volunteered for Habitat for Humanity. Love swinging a hammer. And that sort of thing. And I was drawn to pediatric orthopedic surgeries, always drawn to working with children. It's a fascinating subspecialty within orthopedic surgery because of just the breadth of conditions that you can work with. And there's a part of me that is so passionate about that, loves that work. As I was going through my surgery training, though, I was 27 years old. I had just relocated from the East Coast of the US to the West Coast, to Los Angeles. And I would say at that time, I was 27, I was just deep in the seeking, spiritually, for lack of a better word. And seeking, greater purpose and meaning, and thinking that I was going to get it through this work. That was such a noble calling that I can trace back to when I was a child. But I was, frankly, burnt out is just a shorthand way to put it already by the time I was an intern, and staring down this residency, this 5-year general orthopedic surgery residency where we were working more than 80 hours a week. I had matched into a program that didn't abide by the work hour restrictions. And because of the culture in the program, you just had to suck it up and do it. And
ladies and gentlemen, your surgeons don't have to abide by work hour restrictions. Just so you know.
We did it when I was there. The chairman of the program has since been fired, and there's been a change of leadership there. Yeah. So I was honestly worried about finishing the residency. And so I started my meditation practice intern year. I just crossed paths and met, the man who would be, become my husband. Met some of his friends who were working in technology and a little more creative, a little more out of the box thinkers there than a lot of folks you'll meet in medicine. And just started exploring psychedelics. I was interested in psychedelics from a young age. But didn't really know anyone who was exploring them on the East Coast where I was. You can't really find them. And that was part of my inspiration for trying to match into out in California. I just had a feeling I would meet people who were, and sure enough, didn't take long. Explored MDMA, psilocybin, ayahuasca that first year, and just had my mind blown open. I was fortunate to be held in such a wonderful, tight-knit group of friends who were just grounded, and we were just exploring together. And I was experiencing such incredible transformation personally, healing the grief from my father's passing when I was 20, my own like physical healing with my hormones, disordered eating, just all my own anxiety, my relationship to stress. Life just became so much more easeful and effortless, while still in a very demanding, orthopedic surgery residency. I was actually flowing with life so much better and more, and had a much healthier relationship to life. I was just fast and spent all my free time reading about the research going on in psychedelics. So this coincides with when, researchers at like Roland Griffiths at Hopkins, Robin Carhart Harris at Imperial College of London, folks at NYU. Now most of the institutions have established some sort of psychedelic research and consciousness kind of departments. The FDA gave breakthrough therapy status to psilocybin in 2018. That was when I was midway through my residency training. So I'm following all of this and thinking, wow, psychedelic medicine is actually going to change everything. I just had these visions so clearly, for me at least, but it wasn't clear at the time how I would practice it, what the legal pathways were going to be. So while I seriously contemplated quitting residency, I stayed committed to graduating and finishing out that path for many reasons, but it was a bit existential for me in there.
Was one of the reasons you're a Korean mother, by any chance?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Yeah, she sacrificed everything, right, for my education, and I wanted to make her proud. And I say filial piety runs deep in my veins. So, and I still loved the work. There's a part of me that I say, I didn't like about 80% of the job, 20% of the job I still loved. I loved so much when I was in the operating room, actually helping patients. So I also say that I, for my Korean mother, wanted to get Harvard somewhere on my CV. And so I managed to squeak that in my final year of training in fellowship. Here you go, Mom. I finally did it. Aren't you proud of me? She was proud, but I think it really was more for me than for her. And I wanted to train at the legendary Boston Children's Hospital, Harvard University, and to see how things work there. Climb right into the ivory tower, if you will. So that was a fantastic experience. And during that year, I, was following the news again, still during that year. And that's when Oregon passed Measure 109, the Psilocybin Services Act, which legalized psilocybin facilitation, first of its kind in the world for just adult use, which is different from medical use. And I was astonished. I was like, wow, that happened. It was a grassroots community-based effort. I didn't see it coming. I didn't really know until that it was actually up for a vote. I just saw that it had passed when that made headlines. So I was thinking to myself, like, wow, that's going to be ground zero for psychedelics, starting with psilocybin. I still, I'm just graduating residency. I'm at the pinnacle of my career. I'm being told, like, you're a star, you can do anything. And I had to make my first choice point of whether or not I was going to take an academic position or an employed one. Or I actually contemplated going into private practice right off the bat. I knew I didn't want to do academic pediatric orthopedic surgery. It just wasn't a passion of mine, the research in that area. And I was looking for jobs, and there are only so many that open up in the country for that subspecialized of a position. But the universe works in mysterious ways. One did open up in Oregon, in Portland, Oregon. There was a surgeon, still good friends with him, who was retiring, and the position was opening up. So I interviewed and was thinking, you know what, maybe I'll just get plugged into Portland and work for a few years and then just see where where life takes me. I moved here, started that job, and then the InterTrek training program opened and was enrolling their first cohort of student facilitators for their training program. And this is to be eligible to get the license for psilocybin facilitation in the state. And I actually was not following that. It was a friend of mine who sent it my way, who works in the underground. And he said, hey, Tracy, have you seen this? You might be interested in the program, giving me a little nudge in that direction. And I applied. I enrolled as a student while I was still working. And just everything in my heart was pulling me in that direction. And I went through another existential crisis of whether or not I was going to be able to continue to practice pediatric orthopedic surgery, which was incredibly demanding. I was taking Q4 call which is being on call every fourth night on average at the level 1 trauma center here in Portland at the Children's Hospital. I was performing spine reconstruction surgery, hip reconstruction surgery, congenital malformation reconstruction surgery. It was a really demanding career. And I was feeling very torn because I was also wanting to develop myself as a psilocybin facilitator. And I didn't feel like I could be excellent at both. I also, and not to mention that I have 2 young children now, so I'm also in my childbearing years, just to add a little more spice to the mix. And so, yeah, I was just like, it's not humanly possible for me to do. I kind of had these 3 identities of mother, surgeon, and facilitator. So, not to mention that I had told the leadership in my department that I was pursuing the psilocybin facilitation, and they weren't exactly supportive of it, and because of the legal status with psilocybin still being Schedule 1. So,
so for those listening, it's I believe it's legal or it's decriminalized in Oregon, but in a federal level, it's not legal, which makes it a very tricky, it's gray zone, I would say.
It is a gray area. It's decriminalized, which means that you can possess, you can use, you can't transact. Then there's the state level adult use model where you can transact. So you can provide services, you can grow and sell the mushrooms. And then there's medicalization, which would be through the medical system. But yes, it's still at the federal level, scheduled as Schedule 1, which according to the Drug Enforcement Agency has no medical use or benefit, along with cannabis and other things. So Fentanyl, on the other hand, is not Schedule 1.
It's fine.
It's a bizarre system, an archaic system that for sure needs some reworking. So yeah, it is in the gray zone, and you would think that in Portland, arguably one of the most progressive liberal cities in America, that you would find people who would be open-minded to what this medicine can do for people. Maybe be curious about, like, wow, you're really interested in this. Why? But they were not very curious or supportive, and so. Yeah, I made the decision to resign from that position so that I could pursue this full time. And that was a lengthy process to work out the conflict between my head and my heart in that process, but decided to follow my heart and move into psilocybin facilitation full time.
Amazing. And that is the birth of Eleusia, right?
Correct. Yes.
Can you tell me about Eleusia?
Sure. So Eleusia is the name for my practice. It is an homage to the Eleusinian mysteries. And for anyone who's curious to learn more about it, there's a fantastic book by Brian Murarescu, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, called The Immortality Key. So he dove into what classicist scholars have uncovered with the evidence for the use of psychedelics in the mysteries of Eleusis. So this is going back to ancient Greek times, the times of, the famous Greek philosophers, really the birthplace of Western civilization as we know it. And there was a psychedelic brew that was being served in these rites of passage that were held there, called kukion. And so kukion most likely had some sort of psychedelic fungus in it, maybe an ergot derivative, or it's not totally clear. But there were these annual rites of passage where, there's an inscription on Mount Athos by one of the priests there that says, if you die before you die, then you never really die. And so it's this idea of, to me, I interpret that as undergoing a psychological death and rebirth. There's something about that process that allows us to tap into insights that actually aid us in our flourishing as a species. And so we've lost that with the subsequently around that time was the birth of the Abrahamic lineages. And with the Abrahamic lineages, we sort of lost this practice of annual rites of passage. And it's interesting to me because the rites were facilitated largely by female priestesses. And that, of course, was shut down as the Abrahamic lineages come forth. Female priestesses were rebranded as witches, and then there was no longer this direct access to this altered state. The altered state became mediated through, some member of the church. So, fast forward 2,000 to 3,000 years, here we are in modern times. Many people have no longer identify with a particular religion. I think people are in deep exploration when it comes to their spirituality. And I view Eleusia as sort of the next iteration of these rites, these ceremonies, and bringing them back in their new form, whichever form they want to take. And that's the inspiration for Eleusia.
Mm. You say an annual rite of passage. And I'm wondering what you mean by that, because a rite of passage to me is something where you give birth, you become a mother, for instance, or in other, you undergo a harrowing journey to join a community, or, whatever, some sort of test to join a tribe. What do you mean by annual rite of passage?
So it wouldn't necessarily have to be annual. That would be a really regular cycle. But there's something, I view a rite of passage, in this case with Eleusia, as an initiation really for anyone who is looking to step onto the earth medicine or psychedelic medicine path. So it's an intentional ceremonial engagement with the medicine, and ideally within within some sort of circle, within a group setting. Then it's a rite of passage in the sense that it can be a bit of a harrowing process to open up one's psyche and explore what is there. The human psyche is as unexplored as, the outer reaches of space or the depths of the ocean. I think it was, I want to say it was Stanislav Grof who said that, psychedelics are to the human mind as the telescope is to looking into space. So it's just another way of exploring the human mind, which is arguably, one of the most potent and powerful forces on the planet, in our galaxy. Who knows? We are just a manifestation of self-aware consciousness. And for so long, these medicines have been suppressed, and we are not, legally by our own governments allowed to engage with these medicines. And fortunately, we have various indigenous lineages who have survived the onslaught of the Abrahamic lineages, namely in South America, in the Amazon, in the jungle, who have kept, intact this type of ceremony and engaging with an earth-based medicine responsibly, and what that can do for people. And I feel like we modern day Westerners have lost touch with those kinds of ceremonies, and people are exploring, in the underground or in whichever capacity. Oftentimes it's recreational, or a lot of times, unfortunately, irresponsible, a lot of times responsible. But I think there's something really special about approaching it intentionally, ceremonially, and in that way, it is like a rite of passage. It's an experience, at least for me, that I had that very much felt that way, that I had never had an experience like that up until that point in my life. And I feel very inspired to cultivating those experience, to provide that experience for others, and to cultivate the setting for something like that to unfold.
What was your experience like?
So I say, I got to sit with a woman, an indigenous medicine carrier. Her name is Tatiana. She is an ayahuasquera, and I've been sitting with her for the last several years now. She's become a friend of mine, and she she is originally from Brazil, indigenous on her mother's side, Portuguese on her father's side. And she, although on her mother's side, this is a medicine in her mother's lineage, she did not grow up with it. It was something that she discovered as a young adult after going through her own harrowing experiences, experiencing her own childhood trauma, getting lost in alcohol as a young adult, as really a form of self-medication, and then returning home really to this medicine. And she would travel, up, she's trained, for many years down in the jungle, several months long, fasting, that sort of thing, very rigorous training, shamanic training. And she would carry this medicine through customs into Los Angeles and actually hold ceremony there with her partner, Charles. And it was one of these ceremonies that I dropped in on through a friend of a friend, and experienced the most transformational night of my life, still to this day. That opening and that coming home, that remembrance. And it was such a really like just a huge exhale, continuous exhale of relief that experience and that awakening, really.
Can I ask what happened on your journey? What did you see? What did you experience?
What did I see? Just incredible. Words fail to capture, right? These ineffable experiences. The Icaros that she channeled, along with her two other ayahuasqueros there with her that night. So they channeled the music, the song of the plants, and took it. That is the journey that I went on. You can call it synesthesia and whatnot, but incredible colors and sacred geometry just playing out with my eyes completely closed in this dark room. And just noetic messages of profound gnosis. It's a deep remembrance, really, of wholeness and communing with some other conscious entities is really what it feels like. A total transpersonal mystical experience, if you want to use the scientific literature terms for it. And just incredible messages being sent that sound totally cliche in our normal waking state of, we are one, and, you are love. It's just like these, but when it's not heard with your ears and processed through the logos part of your mind. It's just like as if a message is sent straight from heart to heart.
Did you say you are love? As in you are, you said love, didn't you? Love, not Loved.
Yeah, you are love.
Yeah.
Love
so you
incarnate.
You are the embodiment of love. Yeah.
The embodiment of love. Love incarnate. To you are, that's what you are. You come from love. And I experienced, I revisited really my childlike self, and just a profound gratitude for the love that my parents, where previously I memories of my childhood would often be quite painful. I revisited just all of the ways that my parents poured divine love into me, and that I just didn't recognize. Didn't have an appreciation for, and at least in that profound of a sense. And I felt held by the universe, that there was nothing to worry about, that, life is a journey to be experienced. It's a dance, a co-creation. It's not, I felt this weight lift off of me, that it was like that it was all up to me and do full ego dissolution, my identity as I knew it, dissolving away. It was, and I say too that that's actually when I really felt drawn to yoga as a practice, came through in that journey where I was like, oh, yoga, let's explore that. That's really fascinating. Unity of, mind, body, and spirit. Let's see what that practice is about. So I say that was the birth of my yoga practice, but yeah, it was, I didn't follow the integration protocol that I now recommend for my clients because I had a shift in the emergency room the very next day, which was surreal. It was surreal is the word to describe it. I found myself under the fluorescent lights and just back in the buzz when I was still
the smell of the hospital. Yeah.
Fresh off of my first ayahuasca journey.
Hopefully you could transmit the love to the kids though.
Yeah, to all patients, really. I mean, at the time, I was in the emergency room of, again, a level 1 trauma center in South Central Los Angeles. So you can only imagine what's rolling through the doors each night. And it was a 5 p.m. shift. So the evening shift is always a little more action packed.
There must be a lot of trauma associated with working in the ER.
Oh, yeah. There's a reason. I think it's one of the most burnt out professions in medicine. All of the social ills you face off with in the emergency room. Talk about not being equipped with things that can really, really help people. We have, our people coming into the doors asking for help for all manner of what are ultimately intergenerational trauma wounds.
Can you describe that more? Can you put make that a little more concrete? Like what specifically would be a manifestation of an intergenerational trauma wound?
Yeah, some people refer to it as the cycle of poverty. But really, if you look at there's a fantastic study that called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study that looked at various dimensions of adverse experiences that can happen during that time of your life when you're so vulnerable and developing as a new human and your psyche, which, a lot of your subconscious layering is what gets set in that at that time. And depending on the family circumstances that you happen to be born into, and if you experience any sort of abuse, whether it's physical, emotional abuse or neglect, if you have a parent who's addicted to something or facing some sort of substance use issue, if you have parents who are divorced or separated, if you lose a parent, all manner of things that can happen. And if you look at our most impoverished communities, the scores that you get a point for each, experience, and the scores are through the roof. So it's no wonder, and it was through that study that really showed how these various social determinants of health actually lead to real physical health consequences and ramifications, whether it's chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or, cardiovascular disease, dementia, or suicide, and that sort of thing. So I really view a lot of the root of what we're seeing in of what's facing, what our healthcare systems are facing these days is intergenerational trauma. This trauma is passed along often within families, within through those various adverse experiences. Sometimes it's just tragedy, though, an accident of tragedy, of loss. And we don't have the proper grief rituals in place to process a lot of this grief and trauma. We self-medicate through whatever substances are available to us, whether that be, alcohol, marijuana, various street drugs, whatever it is to numb and escape the profound pain that so many of us are carrying. and that manifest as all sorts of disease. And so a lot of that's just a lot of what we're seeing is self-medication, also through various ways that we, we all know, I think we all understand, we should exercise, we should eat well, we should manage our stress, whatever the ways that the lifestyle factors that help lead to good health outcomes. And yet, why do so many people fail to do that for themselves? And I think it's a really misdirected way of trying to self-medicate pain. And so yeah, that's a lot of what I came to see over and over again when I was working in that system. And we would have, you can see this play out within families and also just within a particular individual who would, 1 month be, high on something and walking along one of the California freeways, getting run over, breaking multiple bones. We piece the person back together, get them up and walking again, only to have them return 6 months later with the same thing. It was really disheartening. And it felt like swimming upstream some days.
A lot of the doctors, I happen to be friends with quite a few doctors, and it seems like a profession that I would not wish my child go into, to be honest, in the way that it is right now. It seems like they are overworked and don't have enough time for their lives and for the rest of their lives, and don't have time to, you mentioned that some of the doctors at your work were anti-psychedelics. And that makes sense to me from what I can see from my friends. Not that they're necessarily anti-psychedelics, but because they're so overworked, they just don't have time for other things in their life, especially in the first decade or so. I'm wondering if you can talk about what you wish, what kind of resource you wish doctors had access to.
Yeah, in some ways, the system is specifically designed that way. If you look at the history, at least in the United States, which much of the rest of the world bases their training and healthcare systems a lot on what has been developed here in the US. But if you go back to the sort of grandfather of modern medicine and surgery, there's William Halsted, who notoriously was addicted to cocaine and doing research with cocaine when he developed the entire concept of a residency program where residents lived at the hospital. And he would go on these cocaine fueled benders and challenge the residents in this sort of egomaniacal kind of way to keep up with him when he's on a 3-day bender. Can you imagine? And so that mentality, it carries through to today. And it's a little bit like the, I don't know if you've heard, I think it's almost like an old wives' tale, but I love this story where this woman inherits this recipe from her mother for roasting a pot roast. And she takes her mother instructs her, to cut both ends of the pot roast and discard them, and then put the chunk of meat in the oven. And the daughter asked, why do you cut the ends and like that? And she said, oh, my grandmother, your grandmother, my mother taught me that, so I'm teaching you. And she, goes to the grandmother. She said, grandmother, why do we cut the ends off of the pot roast? And she said, oh, well, back then we had, our ovens were only so big and I had a small pan. And so I had to cut the pot roast to make it fit into the pan to fit into the oven. And so, and the mom in this, 3 generations didn't question it, just listened to what her mom taught her and was passing down this way of cooking the pot roast. And I feel like a surgery residency is no different in a lot of ways. There has been this tradition of mostly men until recently, of and a lot of modern day medicine too is informed by the military and various innovations that were discovered on the battlefield by doctors in the Civil War, in terms of surgery at least, And so, yeah, for lack of a better way of describing it, it's tradition based on a sort of misguided tradition, this way of just sacrificing everything for this calling. And I think it's, medicine is unique in the sense that it's not really just another job. It's really a vocation, a calling for so many people. And there's so much like wrapped into it too, with wounded healer archetypes and trying to become whole through helping other people. And so it's really a passion, and there's moral dimensions to it and ethical dimensions to it. And I think that, at least for me, I was really actually attracted to that. I really wanted to dedicate myself fully to something like that. But as you get older and then you start contemplating starting a family of your own, you realize that it's not compatible at all with having a healthy family where you are present for raising your own children. So yeah, I think there are, as medicine evolves, there is an awakening to all of this, and things are changing. Hence the work hour restrictions. The residents used to work 120 hours a week. Now they work 80 hours a week only.
Only 80. Oh, thank God.
Yeah. And if the old guard loves, just reminding us that they did 120 hours a week. You only have to do 80. You're soft. And not to mention that their rates of chronic disease and divorce and whatnot leave, nothing to be desired. It was rare for me to come across someone who I really viewed as a mentor, in the sense that they had a healthy personal life, and a wonderful career, and didn't sacrifice their personal life for their career, which I did not want to do. But I think that people are realizing this. It's a generational thing. They say, what is it? Science progresses one death at a time. That is the same thing for medicine too. And so the culture is changing. I would say that it's actually possible still to work that much, but I think I was just like, there is a way for me to find a way. I found a way to thrive in residency thanks to, honestly, to psychedelics. I think there is a way to move through really demanding times of life with the right mindset. I was woefully underprepared going into residency, and I see many of my colleagues who get ground to a pulp in the process, who either have to leave medicine or end up divorcing their spouses, or something has to give, right? And when you're trying to move through life, not really fully consciously aware of all the forces at play. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. There's still, I think once you make it out of training, you have a little bit more control over your career and your schedule and what you say yes to. And a lot of the work I do actually is with other physicians in deconditioning really, it's like entering a cult. It's a deconditioning process of letting go of giving up everything for your job, realizing that that's not sustainable, wanting to put boundaries into place, saying no, whether it's saying no to extra call, no to extra cases, whatever it is, you're constantly getting pressure to do, and standing firm in in what you need to flourish long term.
Absolutely. I think psychedelics are one of those things where it seems like when you take them, a lot of boundaries around your life dissolve. Like you start to realize like, oh, these, like the concept of money, right? You might take psychedelics, and I've taken tons of psychedelics before, and you might, I remember at some stage looking at money while on mushrooms and being like, I can just give someone this worthless piece of paper and they just give me, I think it was a plant, right? Like I can just buy this amazing life form and I trade it for this worthless piece of paper. And it's really beautiful how you can, I'm sure, look at the medical system under the influence of psychedelics and see like, oh, these structures are here because tradition imposed them on us and they don't need to be here. Now, one thing I am wary of with psychedelics is that the Chesterton's fence argument, I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but for the audience, Chesterton's fence essentially says, don't take down a fence until you know what it's keeping, right? So I wonder, I've seen like, I think the hippie era, the 1960s really dissolved a lot of like traditional family structures, to be honest. And I wonder if people sort of, like one instance that I'm thinking of is like people kind of cast away this idea that we should get married before we have kids. And I think that actually that was probably something that we should do. Like it seems like marriage does in fact support healthy families and growth structures. And I mean, this is sort of a tangent onto a somewhat different topic, but I wonder if I see a dark side of psychedelics in this sense that I think we should be acknowledging, because so often I see people talking about psychedelics as if they're a panacea, and they're great. And I've had wonderful experiences on them and I've really transformed my life, but I don't like to advocate them as if they're 100% great and no downsides.
Yes, I think you bring up so many wonderful points. I sometimes describe myself as a based psychonaut, which, believe me, it will have you sticking out in the scene in Portland to be married with 2 children.
Yeah, a heretic.
I got married 5 years before I had my babies, deep into wedlock, made sure that he was appropriate for, procreating with, and putting myself in that incredibly vulnerable position of birthing a child into the world. And yeah, knowing that I would be forever tied to this person because of that. And, I myself came from, my parents stayed married, but they were going through divorce when I entered college. And even as an 18-year-old, it was deeply, or 19-year-old, it was really destabilizing for me to have my parents be going through that process. And so that somewhat has informed my approach to marriage and raising children and all of that. And I am a bit of a traditionalist for sure. In that way, I see, especially after going through the process myself of, and I think it's specifically with respect to bearing and raising children. If you're not in that game, then do whatever you want. But I do think there's something very Lindy about wedlock when it comes to family structures. And also societal stability. Those societies that have embraced monogamous marriage structures for relationship and family building, as opposed to polygamous societies that you can still see in other parts of the world, you see the lowest amounts of violence and all sorts of other pro-social benefits from that structure. And so I do think it is a bit of youthful folly to just deem that marriage is this oppressive institution created by the church, and we should free ourselves of that. It's naive, and and I think out of touch with the biological realities that render, women who are bearing children incredibly vulnerable. There are all sorts of other, pretty robust as social science can be, at least, but robust studies
Not
showing
robust.
yes, it's not physics, it's not lasers and atoms, okay, but yes, I think it's pretty well established that there are all some of that coming from a 2-parent household is about as privileged as one can get in starting out in life. It's something that every child very innately craves. It's not, I don't think that we are some tabula rasa when we're born, and it's just societally or socially conditioned to want a mother and a father present in your life, and ideally together in that relationship. And also just with all the demands of living in the modern world, I think we can fall into noble savage fallacy sometimes about what tribal life was like as nomadic hunter-gatherers. And there's this, sex at dawn people, and, there's all sorts of different, voices in this space. And it's like, what? Like there's something that works really beautifully well with, a mother and father raising children together in wedlock. But I will also recognize that there are many other family structures that don't fit that mold and still create incredibly beautiful environments for raising a child that are far more beneficial than a lot of situations where mothers and fathers are in wedlock and it's not so great. So I don't want to I don't want to not recognize that. And I know I have plenty of friends who are in alternative relationship structures and who are making it work, and kids can thrive in those settings too. But yeah, I think that this is where having elders in the process, in the 60s, there were no elders leading the charge. It was, Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who were young professors, saying that we should put it in the water. I mean, it's just like, I don't think it actually was an exaggeration for Nixon to say that Timothy Leary was the most dangerous man in America. Like there are ways of, questioning, not just taking at face value the world that you're born into, that I think is really powerful for creating change, when you can just open up to new ideas and possibilities that you wouldn't have considered before. And yeah, Chesterton's fence, we stand on the shoulders of people who came before us. There is wisdom still to be gained from the generations that came before us and the structures that they created, and that we inherited. And so, yeah, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's that tug and pull between, conservative and liberal or progressive, or however you want to describe the dichotomy there.
I have this real sense. I've done psychedelics a number of times, as I said before, and as I've gotten older, I've had this real sense that psychedelics are not for everyone, especially at different times in people's lives. I had this incident with a friend of mine where I walked in and she had taken psychedelics, and I would consider her a person that is very influenced by other people. And sure enough, she was kind of convinced that day to do them by a different person who's all, psychedelics will solve all your problems. They'll fix everything. It's going to heal your trauma. You'll get new business ideas. And she did them. And I ended up walking into the mess, and I was trip sitting here for like hours while she was just bawling her eyes out. And and thinking she was having an allergic reaction. No, you're not having an allergic reaction. Like, just like this kind of, and this kind of ongoing thing. And it occurred to me, I gained a number of lessons from then, but it occurred to me at that point that she was actually not able to consent because, first of all, she had never done it before. And there's this kind of catch-22 with psychedelics where you don't really know what you're getting into. And so consent is never really full. And that's not to say nobody should do them. But the other thing was that she was just convinced by somebody else. And it seems I have this vision, this kind of mystical vision in my mind of what psychedelics should be, how they should be administered. And it's something like you should have to climb a mountain to get there. Like you should have to go through a journey to get the psychedelics, and you should want them and do something for them. Because I think so many people have just been talked into doing it at a party or something. And it's not right. It's not, it should be a transformative experience that you step into willingly, like the hero's journey. And I'm wondering actually so if you have any thoughts on that, and also like, how do you screen people who you think aren't quite ready to undergo the transformation?
Yeah, I would never try to convince anybody that they should do psychedelics. I pretty actively try to spend a lot of, I'm not a very good businesswoman in the sense that I try to convince people not to do it a lot of times. I just had a call a few days ago with a prospective client, and, they're moving through quite a bit of trauma and are deep in the work of healing from that, and still have a ways to go in their preparation journey from my stance. And I don't even have to tell people that. They come to that realization on their own when I go through as best as possible the informed consent process, at least the way that I do it. And so I just say that, look, with psychedelic medicines, you can you can cultivate the setting and set the intention and, be as safe as possible and all of that. And you are opening up your psyche. And I think as soon as you say that, people have a healthy respect for their own psyche. The mind, your mind can do. Your mind can convince you of anything. If you're worried about a psychotic break, you can experience what feels like a psychotic break while on psychedelics. Now, hopefully, if you experience that, you're held within a safe container with a sober facilitator or guide who can make sure you don't actually act out what a psychotic break can look like. And so I warn people of that. Now, does that normally happen with my clients? No, they don't normally feel like, venture into that territory. I think part of that reason is because they are not scared of it in the first place. They're not paranoid about it. They're just not worried about it. But if you're in a recreational setting where you don't feel like that safety factor and that trust factor aren't dialed all the way up, then you're going to have that fear in the back of your mind, and you'll actually subconsciously manifest it in the experience a lot of times. And so that's why I say, I'm not against recreational use of psychedelics at all. I've gone to Burning Man and taken a tab of acid and biked around the playa and taken in the art. And it was one of my peak life experiences. I mean, we set an intention beforehand, and I was with a trusted circle of friends. So in a lot of ways, the set and setting and intention were perfect, but a recreational experience, really, I would say. And I think sometimes those lines can be blurred. But so I'm not some Puritan in that way. But I think it's so personal, the decision. It should be, at least. It should come ideally with a period of introspection, contemplation, and be really coming. I say it's a call that comes from your own heart. You feel called to it. And it can be for any reason, for healing purposes, for curiosity, whatever the intention is, but it comes from within. And so if you're being peer pressured into some way, I think you know that, and that will manifest oftentimes as a challenging experience because you weren't all in. And going all in on exploring, I counsel every one of my clients in our preparation sessions that, we are opening up your psyche. The depth psychologists ring true for a lot of people, that we have our conscious, awareness, and then we have subconscious and possibly unconscious awareness. And then there's also the individual unconscious and the collective unconscious. And then, we are bombarded with there's not only your own lived experience and childhood trauma to process, but there's collective trauma all the time that we are being exposed to, whether it's, war or any kind of suffering that happens to another human being that we get exposed to unexpectedly, oftentimes, even if you aren't tuning into mainstream news, which actually profits off of showing you all these types of things. But and so yeah, that kind of stuff can come up to be wrestled with, to be processed, to be looked at. And so if you're not ready for that, then, and can handle the instability that can come with, basically shutting down your default mode network and allowing all, the other neural pathways to come online, and then go through an intentional integration period afterwards to make sure that you land back on, in your sober waking state, then yeah, don't go exploring psychedelics. And, yeah, I find that a lot of the people who are actually seeking out services with me, being in an above ground legal setting, I'm licensed, I have my medical training, are people who do have a healthy respect for their own mind and recognize that they carry, this individual and collective trauma and actually, want to work with it, but in a very controlled setting.
What is, for the audience, what is individual and what is collective trauma?
So the way that I think of it is there's your own lived experience, from the time of your birth, where, I try to stick with the capital T trauma, like in the adverse childhood experiences study, whether it's various forms of abuse or the things that I laid out earlier. It could just be, early loss of a parent, which is just part of life, is experiencing death of loved ones. That can be traumatic if you're not born into a tradition and in a community that has ritual and ceremony that you're embedded in that kind of community, which so many people are not. Or if it's a tragic or a violent death of some sort, whether it's due to suicide or an accident or something like that. Those are very traumatic experiences for people. But so there's your own, inner circle, the life that you live and then what happens to your inner circle and within your community. But then now that we live in this, global, hyper-connected reality, where it's, you're not only connected to what is happening on the other side of the planet in a way that just we weren't before, but you're also connected to the past in a way that we just weren't connected to before. We used to live these very parochial lives where it was just really the oral history that was passed down to you within your
Which
small
often
village.
Involved magic and dragons.
Yes.
Wizards.
Yes.
King Arthur was part of the history of England for a long time.
Yes, I love that part of what, European lineage. And yeah, we are, I think that's what humanity is reckoning with now, is like with the internet, with everybody who has the ability to do this kind of research on their own and tell, different stories outside of the stories that we inherit or what's taught in the mainstream. We just are awakening to how we are basically brutal chimpanzees to one another, like in the evolution of humanity. Just these ruthless tribal creatures. And yeah, humanity everywhere, cultures everywhere have committed atrocious crimes like to one another, both on the individual level, but also through civilizational warfare. I mean, we just lived through the most violent century, I think, ever in human history. Yeah. Last century. Yeah, with the development of nuclear weapons and just warfare basically reached a peak last century, and we are only 1 or 2 generations removed from that, all of us.
Dan Carlin has this episode on World War I, and he talks about how soldiers were preparing to go into battle with, their muskets that would take ages to reload and probably some horses and stuff, and then they just get chemical weaponed. Like they just get chlorine gas that's filtering into their lungs and just destroying them from the inside out, and bombs. And then these hospitals were just not prepared for 10,000 people to show up bombed. Like it was just like our psyches, our entire knowledge of life until this day had never experienced anything like this.
Yeah, it is pretty wild to actually contemplate all of that. Yeah, I just the other day was I forget what I was reading, but just contemplating even just hand-to-hand battle. Like, I think it was something with swords. There was actually this like really cool image. Someone asked like, it was kind of funny, a funny meme on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. But it was like a bunch of different sword styles. And it's like, whichever sword you are, that's going to say a lot about you. So I was looking at all the different sword types. And I was like, I'm definitely something East Asian. But then I then was contemplating actually wielding the sword. And then I was thinking, like, just imagining actually trying to be in a sword battle with somebody and how just savage that is. It is wild. And and all of it really was born out after the advent of agriculture as a technological innovation as a species, where land, we have now the concept of land ownership. Land is what keeps your tribe alive. You need land to grow food. And then the battle over that land actually means the survival of your kin. And so I can see now that I'm a mother, when it comes to the survival of my children, what I could be capable of if it came down to it, right? And I think that humanity is really just, we're moving through, hopefully transcending that phase of our evolution where that was, where that was necessary. And it's like, look, we have a lot of problems now, but I think we can recognize that we are all in it together on the planet, especially, with like biological warfare being a possibility. Like, not only does nuclear warfare impact everybody, but so does biological warfare. There's no wielding that against each other. And so, yeah, I think that's something that we're still moving through, that we're in this period of just rapid, amazing sense making, kind of peak cultural war, which I think is a lot healthier than actual war. And so I'm like, okay, let the battle of the culture wars play out. And that's what we're seeing right now on social media, among other phenomena.
The culture war to me is I've heard that, right? I've heard like let it play out. And then I think like when I watch culture war influencers, which I do watch, and then when I remember to, I just fucking mute them because they just get into my psyche way too hard. Like I get so caught up in it. It's the worst. And like, oh no, I'm agreeing with someone again. Mute. but it's just cracked me. I don't know. I'm addicted to it. So, but when I think about specific, like either side of the culture war, it doesn't matter. What they're playing into is they're trying to, it's as if they're actually fighting a war. Like they're not trying to convince the other side. They're not trying to say, hey, let's have, I mean, most people, some of them are, but most of them are not saying, hey, let's have a reasoned discussion. Here's the points that I like about your side. And here's how I think you're feeling. And, you know, like, but like, I think that these studies indicate that I'm right here, and maybe these studies indicate that you're right here. And we're not doing that though. What we're doing is we're strengthening our side and the resolve of our side in a cult-like way, where we're kind of brainwashing ourselves. We're only consuming the media from our side. We're only insulting the other side. And I mean, what is the aim? I ask myself, like, is the aim a real war? Because it seems like the aim might be a real, you know, people talk about the dissolution of the United States, like, you know, at some stage the left and right are going to kind of part ways and go through a civil war, which I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but that does seem like the aim of most people, to win rather than to find compromise.
Yeah, I know. The culture war is such a nebulous term. It feels like there's multiple battlefronts, yeah, there's definitely more skilled culture warriors than others. And I think, yeah, the highly skilled ones don't fight straw men. And I do think it is part of a sense-making process for people. And I am glad to hear that you have some good self-awareness. It can be like crack in a lot of ways, because it preys on, you know, outrage is like its own addiction, right? I think it is a falsely generative energy to be outraged about something. You feel lit. It's like this kind of like lit up somatically feeling. And so, and it can be generative in the sense of firing you up to go do something that you feel passionate about. If that's in fact the outcome of whatever it is that you come across and it inspires you. I mean, a lot of times when I come across this stuff, my take on it is the lens I see it through is like, oh shit, there's a lot of just intergenerational trauma here. And if people can process it and form healthy responses instead of reactive ones, and realizing that the battle ultimately is with yourself, always, that we could fix a lot of the issues that we're facing now, which to me, a lot of which are coordination issues. I think that's what the culture wars really are about, is there's been a shattering of consensus reality with social media. And so we're in the very early innings of this game that, I mean, social media has really just taken off in the last 15 years, which is a blip on the evolutionary scale of time. And I think we're just seeing the, you know, peak decentralization of, it's like a period of, you know, there's a contraction and expansion, and we're just kind of, you know, from centralization to decentralization, we're kind of in a period of, you know, after a consolidation of powers after World War II in the last century, we're just in a new period of decentralization and realigning of various axes of power. And so whether or not, you know, I don't think anyone knows where the rest of the century is going to go. I certainly hope it's not towards World War III. And for the people who are, you know, war hawks or warmongering for such a thing, I think part of it is like, because war is such an ancient, you know, millennia old energy, really. Like it's something I think that human beings, we are, myth-making creatures. We find a lot of meaning in fighting for what we believe in. And I just hope that we recognize that it's not each other that we're meant to fight. Like I said, it's the inner battle, and then also the collective battle of evolution on our planet.
Absolutely. I think what I try to remind myself when I see people, like, let's just say, a guy who hates women on the internet, right? He says disparaging things about women. I try to remember, like, he's probably had a terrible experience with the women in his life. I'm sure, like, he didn't have an excellent mother growing up. I'm sure the women in his life were not kind to him. I'm sure there were authoritarian teachers, whatever I want to imagine, like, and he's just expressing his trauma onto all women because all women in his sample were terrible. Like, I just want to feel for that. Like, I don't need to hate him. I don't need to get angry at him. I can just feel his pain and try to resonate with him.
Yeah, that's my interpretation. If you're born into a loving family with a loving mother and father, you don't see these kinds of things manifest. Daddy issues, mommy issues. A lot of us have them. Yeah. I just say, like, healing's possible, like, and it's not gonna come from, like casting away half of humanity. That usually doesn't lead anywhere good. It might feel good in the folly of your youth, which I feel that I think a lot of these, anon accounts are a lot of, it could just be a lot of people just exploring various sides of themselves. They don't actually move through the world with those beliefs, but through anonymous accounts, you can just put this transient thought or feeling out into the web and see how it's received. And so a lot of it is, I think, is just that. And it's a bizarre thing, the internet and the social media universe. It's its own world with a different set of rules and etiquette and norms that oftentimes feel completely divorced from base reality. Yeah. There's some overlap there, but it's quite different.
So for our final section of this podcast, I'd love to ask you about Eleusia Health. And specifically, let's imagine I'm a patient coming in and I'm interested in trying some psychedelic therapy. What is the process that I'll go through? So what's the initial screening stage? What is it like to be in the therapy space with you as I'm undergoing this crazy journey? And then what is the integration stage like?
So I say it's facilitation, not therapy, which is important from a legal standpoint. And so really the stance that I take, the approach that I take is what's called a non-directive approach. So a lot of it is really client-led. And so the initial intake process involves an initial consultation with whatever your intentions are for approaching the work. So, for example, you could say that, my mother just passed away a little over 2 years ago. And then, we went through the pandemic. I'm having some troubles with my marriage, and I'm feeling really disconnected from my work. I'm feeling it really hard. So you'll come in with those initial, I'd love to work through some of those things. Kind of identify those things. And so we'll have an initial consultation together. And then I usually, go through the overarching process of what preparation and then the journey and integration look like. And so, and then if that sounds good, then you fill out the intake form where we really dive into everything. So the preparation is usually, there's two different calls or sessions. It can be in person if you're local, or a virtual session. And that's where we just dive deep on everything that you shared in the intake and what you're working through in the first session, in the intake. And then for the preparation session, that's usually the day before the journey. And that's where we just go over sort of the arc of the day. We review what dosing that you're looking for. We kind of do that in the consultation as well. Most people are seeking out these services are looking for what's called macro dosing. So a full dose of psilocybin for really, a lot of people are investing a lot of time, energy, and attention into this, and so are looking for more of a transformational experience. So we review that the day before. And then the journey day itself is usually a 6 to 8 hour commitment. And so I take my clients through a ceremonial, ritualized experience with the medicine. I like to weave that in to really open up the journey day and to close the journey day. And then
what does the ceremonial, ritualized experience look like?
It usually is opening up with, for me, I really love to weave smell and a smudging practice into the beginning of it, because smell is such a powerful, it's a way to powerfully evoke memory in a primal sense. And so by opening up the ceremony experience with that and closing, it can be a powerful integration tool for daily practice. So I usually open up with some sort of smudging. I have a beautiful cedar tree. We're in the Pacific Northwest here, next to my home. So I will just harvest dried branches from there, and I dry it myself and create a cedar bundle, and then send my clients home with their own bundle, sort of a keepsake from the local land here. I usually weave in some sort of prayer, really a prayer of thanks and gratitude to the medicine, to those who help to cultivate the medicine, to those who are stewards of the space that we're in, the centers that we do this work in, and also just calling in whomever you would like to call in to the ceremony space, whether it's loved ones, those who have passed away, any particular, if you're connected to any plant spirits or animal spirits, there's an invitation to bring that energy into the space. And then I open up, and then we take we say, the prayer over the medicine, and then we take the client takes the medicine, and then I guide with sound bowls, with crystal sound bowls, which give off a binaural beat, and carry people into a theta wave brain state for the first 45 to 60 minutes of the journey. So it's the time between ingestion of the medicine and onset, usually, of the medicine. And people really appreciate that, because that time period can be, I wonder if you've experienced that, it can be a bit of an anxious period of time when between taking it and the onset of the journey. And so having the guided meditation, usually with some sort of body scan and gratitude, loving kindness style meditation is just a beautiful mindset to be in as the medicine is taking hold. And
also I have to say, I've experienced the crystal bowls before, and it's nothing like you can hear on a computer. Being in a room with the crystal bowls that are, it is it's like they put you in a meditation state immediately. It's incredible. It was like nothing I've ever experienced. And I had a client say to me that it felt like an anesthetic induction before surgery. It just puts you almost involuntarily into this relaxed state, and a parasympathetic state, which is a wonderful state to be in as the mushrooms come on. And that's exactly how, and the vibration of the bowls, obviously, you can't capture that in an audio recording. And so, I love opening up the ceremony day with that.
And then about an hour in, there's an option under the regulatory framework to do what's called a booster dose. And so I usually don't have clients start out with the maximum dose that's allowed. We start some level below that and then have an option to boost with some amount. And so I'll check in after the sound bath and to see if that booster dose is desired or not. I say it's so far about 50-50 whether or not clients go for the booster dose or not. And then after that point, I play just a curated playlist that is informed by some studies done with music and psychedelic journeys that help to carry through the rest of the psilocybin journey. So usually there's a peak about 2 to 3 hours in, and then there's a slow sort of undulating come down, and then we close the container, and then I usually have my clients have something to eat to ground down back into the physical body. There's usually hardly any appetite at all with psilocybin mushrooms, but just having a little bit helps to kind of ground back into your sober state of consciousness so that you can navigate your way out of the center home, either home or to wherever you're staying. A lot of my clients are not local, they're from out of state. And so they're staying elsewhere. So I make sure you get home, and then the next day there's an integration session. Weather permitting, I love to meet my clients in the Arboretum here, which has a wonderful little cluster of redwood trees. Just a beautiful place to explore on the day after your psilocybin journey when you're still in this very kind of open-hearted afterglow period. So we review some of the insights from the journey. One of my favorite things is the integration sessions afterwards. I love hearing about people's journeys and the insights that come through. And I'm always learning from my clients who have, each and every person has incredible wisdom, laying in your heart, just waiting to be exposed. And so it's really beautiful. And it's like integration for me, just those sessions. And then I do a 1 week follow-up, a 1 month follow-up, and then a 3 month follow-up. Now I'm doing these longer follow-ups as part of it. And those are just 1 hour sessions, either usually virtually, just to help with the integration process as people kind of land back into their regular lives. And some clients go on to become coaching clients of mine, where I will meet with them usually about once a month or so to help largely with just guidance and accountability with implementing actionable changes that they would like to make in their lives after the journey.
I've experienced that it's easy to get insights on psychedelics, but implementing them into your life afterwards is the really hard part. And I'm wondering, well, if you agree, and also how do you help people implement these actionable steps into their lives?
Yes, it's all about the integration. You can for sure see people who will fall into chasing the peak experience because it feels really good to, you're on a high, of course, with all of these wonderful insights or downloads that come to you, and you can just feel like, wow, it's a feeling of euphoria, among other things. And it doesn't matter if you don't take those insights from the altered state and then convert them into an altered trait ultimately and how you show up in life. So I say we take the altered state and we turn them into an altered trait. So and a lot of times it's interesting for people where they get into trouble is largely around interpersonal dynamics, because it's that's where I say it's like in relationship, that relationships are the crucible of our personal evolution, because it's in intimate relationships, especially intimate ones, that we get a mirror to, you know, back to ourselves of where we are not showing up in the way that we hope to show up. And just our intimate relationships are able to, you know, trigger a reaction in a way, in a lot of ways that other relationships don't. And so a lot of integration work that I help my clients with are around active listening, conscious communication, emotional intelligence, just self-awareness, guidance on meditation practices, guidance on, you know, particular resources or something if they're exploring, whatever work they're called to explore, whether that ends up being inner child work or shadow work or a movement practice or anything of that sort.
I think it's very possible that people can come back with all these new ideas and, you know, I'm going to change the way my relationships are, but without necessarily the skills. One thing about psychedelics that I've noticed is like, it can be unearned wisdom. And I say that not in necessarily a derogatory way, but you kind of just get this download of wisdom, but you haven't had the chance to actually, like, you need to like put down boundaries with your parents, but you don't actually know what boundaries look like. And you don't actually have practice putting down boundaries. And so the next time your mom does this perfectly normal thing for her, you snap at her. And like, you know, that's just an example, but that's, and people can be astounded by the changes you've made and very uncomfortable by it. So it makes a lot of sense that you're helping people just go through a meditation practice and the journaling and things like that to help them kind of bring in this kind of download of extra wisdom and then update all the skills. And so they can actually use it and wield it properly.
Yeah. And I say, I try to help more than anything, people to, I remind them to extend themselves some grace in this process, that however many years it took to lay down your conditioning and programming, whatever you want to call it, your operating system, it's not like you wipe it clean, reboot, and bam, you've installed like brand new operating system. You know, it takes time to rewire our nervous systems, to recondition our thought patterns, to rewrite new narratives and that sort of thing. It doesn't happen overnight. And so, you know, we're all human. We make mistakes. It's part of the process. I do think it is really helpful to engage in whether it's within some sort of community or with some sort of support person or something as you do move through this learning process. Because I think where people start to get into trouble is when they are feeling isolated in the process and like they're groping around for help and not really, and feeling like they can get stuck again. And so, yeah, there are skillful and unskillful ways to move through some of these changes. And I think, yeah, a healthy dose of humility and gentleness and grace is just a lot of what I help to remind people of in the process. And also, I think that's when people really wake up to the power of the subconscious too, and how we can have all the conscious awareness in the world of how we'd like to show up. There's sort of the narrating self, and then there's the experiencing self. It's kind of like that's sort of an idea from Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, this idea that we almost have like two systems in the brain. And so that's why I say the practices, the daily practices, as you're moving through the fresh phases of integration and where neuroplasticity is at sort of an all-time high right after a psychedelic journey. I use the metaphor of a metal bowl going through the fire. You're somewhat moldable, but you will cool down eventually into your new form. And so let's really leverage this, the phase of early integration and this increased neuroplasticity through the use of daily practice to remind yourself and to recondition your awareness to show up fundamentally shifted and altered and the way that you hope to show up in the world.
That's a very good point, because another challenge is if you're doing psychedelics and you come back home and everything's the same, and it's so easy to get caught up in those same patterns that your neural connections are so used to. Like, you've worn a path in your house of certain mental states and certain interactions with people. And so, you go to this psychedelic therapist, it's a different environment, you can be a new person. And then if you can come back and get into all the old habits as before. So that's very important to continue to process and journal afterwards and remind yourself. I have a question about bad trips. How do you stop a bad trip when a client has one?
Well, first I'd ask is, what do you mean by a bad trip?
It's tough because I have my own definition, but I actually wanted to use a conventional definition here of someone's having a panic attack, for instance, or they're going through something like a psychotic episode, or just... I think what people would define as a bad trip is generally very negative emotions, like looping thoughts, for instance, or something like that.
Yeah, so I think looping for sure is kind of a generally agreed upon adverse experience in the psychedelic experience, which is why I say, well, prevention is worth an ounce of cure, or an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. So this is why I put so much emphasis in the preparation period on establishing a meditation practice. And all it takes for a beginner meditator is just to become aware of your thoughts, to create some distance between your so-called self and thought, to not identify with thoughts, to feel what it's like to be in the seat of an observer. And in a way, it's actually the very initial phases of expanding your consciousness outside of just your egoic identity, which is most people's kind of default mode of moving through life. And so I think you're at a much higher risk of falling into some sort of ruminating thought loop. I mean, that's really, if you think about it, what anxiety and depression is, it's rumination and thought loops almost compulsively. Like, you can't not think about those things that then lead to that state. So really the way that I would help someone avoid something like that is establishing a meditation practice. And a lot of it is, through the screening and intake process and then preparation process as well. Like, I have a pretty good read on who is potentially prone to falling into something like that and who is not. And even if it does happen in a journey, the coaching that I take my clients through beforehand is just to lean into resistance whenever that does come up in a journey, and then also to come home to the breath. Those are kind of two mantras that you can take into a journey, lean into resistance and breathe. Just come back to the breath. That will hopefully help with ending the thought loop. And then if you do end up in a thought loop and you ruminate and you experience what that really feels like, which can feel like being in a form of psychosis, I say that there's actually something beneficial to that, to really go into what that feels like. And then you can really recognize when you go into that in your day-to-day so, you know, in your day-to-day sober state of consciousness. And there's an awareness. And I was like, oh, I'm doing that again. I'm ruminating. I'm just sitting in this thought loop. And I actually have conscious control over my thoughts to some degree. And so there's some awakening to higher agency, more of an internal locus of control, that I think is all part of the process.
It's beautiful. I think I strongly agree with most of that. Like, I'm definitely not a facilitator, but like when I talk to people who are going to do psychedelics, I usually give the advice of a bad trip isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like if you know, because people are scared of the bad trip, right? And what I usually say is almost exactly like what you say. Feel the feelings. Like if you feel anxiety, totally feel the feelings, because what's happening right now is you're getting a knock at the door and something's trying to tell you something. But if you ignore it, it just becomes louder and louder, and it knocks harder and harder, and suddenly the whole house is shaking and you're experiencing this earthquake-like phenomenon. But if you let it in and you just experience it and you let it wash over you, I mean, I don't think I've ever experienced a bad trip. And you know, I think a lot of when I've given this advice to people, I think it's really helped enormously, just to be fully integrated with the emotion. And then not only that, but I would say, like, practical terms, turn on the lights, you know, like change your environment in some way, because like the environment around you totally influences the way you are. So if you can go and touch some trees, I don't know what it is about psychedelics and trees, but I mean, so many people I've met have just had experiences of like feeling the energy of the trees or talking to the trees. And it's, even when I don't bring it up to people, they will tell me afterwards about it. And they've never, as far as I know, have heard of this before. I've met so many people who have just had these amazing experiences with trees. So yeah, that's the advice I would say as well. It's everything is kind of meant to be, and it can be integrated. I had this one experience where I was kind of going through this like bad trip on acid, and I threw up, and then I saw in the distance, everything in the distance had a shadow and a light attached to it. And it was my job to integrate them into one. And then I had this amazing experience of embracing my shadow on that night. And it was totally beautiful. So embracing the shadow is like the part of ourselves that we generally keep in the unconscious, whether positive or negative. So I know you know what it is, but so like oftentimes, like, you know, if your mother tells you that you're a terrible artist, then even though you want to be an artist so badly, unconsciously you kind of suppress it and you tell yourself, I'll never be an artist, or I'll never be creative or anything like that. Or a shadow is, you know, you look up at a really arrogant politician that you hate, and unconsciously you actually don't have enough self-confidence in yourself, and you kind of hate him because you're projecting, you see in him this confidence that you yourself can embrace, for instance. So yeah, psychedelics are amazing for shadow work. And also, I know we have about 10 minutes left. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. I would love to hear about your work with tapering people off of SSRIs.
Oh, I would love to share about this because I'm so passionate about it. Yeah, I would say, you know, I'm relatively new to this this practice of helping people taper off of their antidepressants. But it's amazing how few practitioners are educated in this process, and so you can quickly become, you know, an expert of sorts in a relatively short amount of time. And so, yeah, the work, I really kind of boil it down to the service that I provide for people is just to believe that they can do it. At the end of the day, like, it's amazing how so many clinicians are terrified and don't believe in patients like or clients, to be able to do something like this. And so again, just like I would never convince anyone to do psychedelics, I would never convince someone to come off of their antidepressant. I simply provide the service for those people who really want to come off of their antidepressants because they're just not working for them anymore. And so they basically get all of the side effects without any of the benefits. So not only that, but it's sort of a process of optimizing before investing in above ground legal psilocybin services, which is a considerable investment when you look at the time and the money and all of that. So for people who are on antidepressants are known, they're safe to take with psilocybin and certain psychedelics. Certain antidepressants are not safe to take with certain psychedelics. But even though they're safe, they have a risk of blunting the experience. And so there is a risk in the sense that, if you're traveling across the country to Portland for a psilocybin journey and you've tried every other, you have treatment resistant depression, you've tried every other thing, and your antidepressant's not working anymore, but you're still taking it because you're physiologically dependent on it. And then you invest in this psilocybin facilitation experience, and then you don't have an experience. Well, that's pretty disappointing, and also can be, I think, psychologically kind of dangerous because people will hold out hope, a lot of hope after hearing, watching documentaries and hearing all these other stories of transformational experiences for other people. They're hoping for something like that themselves, but a lot of it is expectation management if you're on a blunting medication. And so, yeah, I just help people who are either thinking about entering the tapering process, or a lot of people are already have started the tapering process themselves because it's actually not the beginning of the tapering process that's difficult. It's usually the last little bit of fully coming off of the medicine that is the hardest for a lot of people. And I've helped people come off of not just SSRIs, but SNRIs, which are some of them, like effects are notoriously hard to come off of. I think primarily because of the dopaminergic aspect of that medicine. It's both like serotonergic and dopaminergic. So there's more of a physiologic dependence on some of these other medications. But we just take a holistic approach. And again, it's it's very client driven and it's not prescriptive. And so most people have a pretty solid sense of what they need to do to come off of the medicine in terms of like, oh yeah, I know I have a better day if I exercise. And I mean like sweat, out of breath exercise. I just need to work like my anxiety out of my body somatically. I know I have a better day if I fuel my body properly and I don't skip meals or what have you. Recalibrating what are deemed negative emotions a lot of times, because as people are tapering off of these medicines, they will start to experience a range of emotions that they have been effectively numb to, sometimes for several years. A lot of people are on these medications for way longer than they were ever actually studied. And so they will experience emotions for the first times. Usually it's some sort of sadness, oftentimes, that they haven't experienced in years. And that can be a scary process. It's almost like moving through a stage of maturation that most of us should be going through in our teenage and early or like adolescent and early adult years. But it's almost like revisiting that stage of life again for a lot of people, which, if we remember, it's a tumultuous time, to learn how to feel our emotions and to regulate our emotions and navigate and develop our emotional intelligence. So it's a lot of emotional intelligence work, self-awareness work, and that sort of thing. And so I'll meet with clients period on whatever cadence that they feel they need for support, whether that's, every other week or monthly or that sort of thing. I also offer microdosing guidance as a bridge therapy. And so if someone's interested, not every client's interested in microdosing, but if a client is interested in microdosing with mushrooms as a supportive modality for that last, I say bridge therapy. So you're coming into the last doses. I like hyperbolic tapering, where you can actually get a liquid formulation compounded at the pharmacy and really take your time tapering off if you need, but that can be expensive and drawn out. And so some other clients just say, hey, look, I rather, make the jump from the smallest dose or or sometimes they'll cut pills and use microdosing as a bridge. So I'll start the microdosing, come off of the pharmaceutical medication, continue the microdosing for a period of time, and then come off of the microdose.
What are the symptoms like when somebody finally takes that leap and stops the last quarter pill with an SSRI?
It varies person to person. There can be, there's all sorts of sort of non-specific symptoms, but it can be jitteriness, just tearing up at anything, really. Anything can evoke tears, which then a lot of people have been conditioned to believe are wrong in some way, usually as a child, that those, they were conditioned by their caregivers that crying's not okay in some capacity. There can be other nervous system manifestations, tingling, or I've had clients have tinnitus, which actually I think microdosing I've seen be helpful for. There can be differences in definitely challenges with sleeping. That's a very common one. And so the exercise and nutrition piece of things and just dialing in circadian rhythm, exposure to natural light, supplementing where needed. Those can all be really valuable, like looking at maybe other substance use that you have been engaging with somewhat unconsciously, whether that's caffeine use or otherwise, alcohol use. A lot of times that is contributing to poor sleep and nervous system manifestations that are actually, the alcohol is not doing you any favors.
Neither is cannabis, by the way. I've smoked enough cannabis for 5 lifetimes, and it's terrible for sleep. And nobody can tell me otherwise. Anyone who tells me otherwise is wrong. It fucks with your REM, REM cycles. It's terrible. I mean, it's great in many ways, but it's not good for sleep. Don't take it to sleep.
Yeah, I say the poison is in the dose. So cannabis is like any other plant medicine. It's all about your intention. And I think it can be we can easily fall into not so healthy relationship with it, in which case, it's going to start to manifest as sleep problems.
Yeah, I believe that. So are you still a practicing doctor?
I'm not practicing orthopedic surgery.
Are you going to give up your license, or are you going to keep it?
No, I'm maintaining my medical license. Nice. Yeah. So cool. I'm still licensed through the state of Oregon, through the medical board. They haven't taken any issue with me just yet. There's actually talks about, there's a state representative representative from the state legislature who is sort of in charge of a board in mental health. I just heard about this from one of my colleagues, but they're thinking about creating a separate license for facilitator license for dual license holders. So if you have a license in therapy or any other license, professional license, medical license, then you can apply for this special designation that shouldn't put your license in jeopardy.
Amazing. That's fantastic. That sounds like the future. So Tracy Townsend, Dr. Tracy Townsend, Tracy Kim Townsend, where can people find you online?
I like to point people to my website. So it's www.psychedelics, Eleusia, that's ELEUSIA Health, eleusiahealth.com. There you can sign up for my newsletter. I have presence on various social media platforms. You can find me. I'm usually Tracy K. Townsend or Tracy K. Townsend MD on Instagram, on Twitter. I have a YouTube channel called Eleusia Health. I try to put out a lot of free content for people to kind of get to know my work. And then if it's intriguing to you, hop on the newsletter, and I periodically send out offerings through that.
Great. Yeah, lots of interviews with medical professionals, especially. It's a really great way to get access to the world of doctors, especially slightly unconventional doctors, and how they manage their lifestyles. And yeah, if anyone is interested, especially if you're interested in becoming a doctor, this is the channel to like watch every single video of. Absolutely believe that. Hey, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy.
All right. Have a great day. I'll hopefully talk to you soon.